All right, welcome back to yet another episode of the Blasters and Blades podcast. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans, it's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, you see the headline, you know what the title is. It's a fireside chat. So we're going to dive in. You've heard these before, and we're going to let our panelists introduce themselves. And I'm just going to follow round robin on the screen. So we're going to start with you, Rick. Can you introduce yourself, please?
My name's Rick Partlow. I write military science fiction. My biggest series is the Drop Trooper series. First book's Contact Front, but I have like 14 or 15 series. So something for everybody.
He's a former Army infantry officer as part of his pedigree, and once he wrestled a moose.
That was a bear.
Same thing. I'm a city boy. It's all the same. All right, Peter, can you introduce yourself?
My name's Pete Nealon. Write mostly action adventure, military thriller type stuff, though I've branched out a bit into science fiction and fantasy with the Lost series for Wargate Press. And I spent 8 years as a reconnaissance Marine and then another 8 contracting overseas. And now I teach firearms.
Absolutely. Pew-pews. I know the things. All right, John. Doc Spears, can you introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm John Spears. I, too, unfortunately, write military science fiction. And my background is U.S. Army Special Forces, and then I'm director of Forge Tactical and a contractor currently for the U.S. Army.
And Nick, would you like to introduce yourself? They haven't seen you much lately, so can you just kind of remind them who you are?
Nick Garber. I'm the president of Apogee Comics, creator of the Phantom Hawk, who is a former Green Beret like Doc Spears, except he was a communications dude. And I also write military science fiction, thanks to JR.
Peer pressure is a thing, man. And once upon a time, he was a spicy grunt for the U.S. Army.
I was a spicy grunt.
And then, as you know, I was just your basic bitch, nobody grunt. So, leg in the 101st. Everybody loved me.
I am a same thing, basic bitch, nobody grunt. 25th Infantry Division, no.
But when you're a leg in the 101st, everybody lets you know it. So, that's what I attribute my thick skin to because,
They're all, 101st is all legs. They're just dopes on a rope.
Yep. Once we get around, we're all straight leg infantry, so.
I'll bow out of that one. So this conversation started, I was talking to a friend of the show, Christopher Denote, who is of Air Force fame. He was going to be here, but the Air Force saw fit to send him TDY, and, he couldn't say no. I don't know how that works. I thought Air Force, you just check in, check out.
Yeah, the reservations at the Four Seasons that they made for him, were non-refundable, so he had to go.
Yeah, but we were talking... And we were realizing that one of our biggest complaints, because we just shoot the breeze about the topics, was how unbelievable most combat written in science fiction is. And I was talking to him. I said, you don't even have to have been to combat to realize if you've been camping, you don't stay clean very long. And somehow everything is just so sanitary and static. And that got us thinking this could be an interesting discussion. So I brought on a panel of people who write the stuff and have done the stuff and camped in the woods and gotten dirty before. And I thought we could have that discussion. So first off, we obviously don't want to, name and shame unless they're like long dead and it's a classic. Like you can make fun of Starship Troopers. He doesn't care. I promise. But, we try to keep it, friendly.
There to make fun of.
Yeah.
Well, you can make fun of his movies.
It's not his movie. He had nothing to do with
it. Poor RAH. He got done dirty with that one. Though, I'm all for nude shower scenes at all times, but
if that movie had been named Bug Hunt, which is I think the original title, and they hadn't had the rights to Starship Troopers, it would have been an entertaining movie. But
it's still an entertaining movie. It's just you got to detach the source material from the movie.
Yeah, no, I can't detach Verhoeven. He's a piece of garbage.
So I actually found Heinlein through the movie, and I was like, this sounds interesting. Are there more, in the world? And then I realized the controversy because Google, and then I found his book. So I can't hate the movie because it sent a lot of people into the arms of military science fiction and the good stuff.
Brought you to Jesus. That's right.
It brought me to Jesus. So what is when you're reading action scenes in science fiction, doesn't have to just be mil sci-fi. What is it you look for that makes you say, okay, this is plausible?
For me, the thing that is the line between plausible and implausible is how detailed things are. If they're from like an individual point of view, like close third or first person, if somebody is like describing to you in detail everything that's happening around them, that's bull. I mean, you don't know what's happening around you. You know what's coming in. Maybe you might know somebody's shooting at you. You might realize where they are, but you're not like, oh, this platoon was over to my right, and I knew that Sergeant so and so was coming up. Somebody just started shooting at you. You're confused. You're in the dirt. There's people yelling contradictory things at each other, and you're just trying to find something to shoot back with. At
Okay,
that's me.
I could see that. I think it depends on the point of view, because if it's third person omniscient, you get a little bit of room to play. And I think the tech matters too, because if we're talking colonial Marines, they're basically modern Marines with spaceships because their gear was kind of low tech. Or are you talking full drop ship or drop troop armor where maybe their HUD does give them lots of information? Now,
Well, that's
whether you focus on that's another story, because I mean, we had some on the Blue Force, but once it hit the fan, I don't remember paying that close attention to what other convoys were doing. So,
try not to get shot.
Once that first shot snaps past your head, what other convoys are doing doesn't matter, except insofar as they are inside or outside of your line of fire.
Absolutely. And sometimes not even then, because we had some green on green incidents happen when people got a little too nervous. So
yep.
It happens.
Been there too.
I actually made a point, I think, in the battle suit stuff that somebody's commenting, they got all this information coming in, but you can't pay attention to all of it because it's like a wave washing over you, and you try to grab onto the bits that mean something to where you are and what you're doing.
So I know, Doc, I've read your stuff about the Spec Ops in the Galaxy's Edge universe, and you did a pretty good job of blending the high tech with the low tech in a way that made it believable. So what was your balance when you were trying to do that to sell both?
I think like especially there, I was trying to make an overarching point that for instance, there's always going to be some battle implement that's, a solid chemically driven launched projectile. When it gets down to killing, it's about reaching the vitals of what you're trying to kill. And, no matter what technology we eventually come up with, there's still going to be a role for the basics of killing, whether it's a sword that lets the blood, or it's a vibroblade, or it's a good old fashioned copper pill moving about 3,000 feet per second, or some kind of energy based weapon. And depending upon what the mission set is, and the environment where the mission is being carried out, there's always going to be a role for all of those different technologies when it comes down to the nitty gritty of killing. That's just never going to go away. So, at the time, trying to, not that I don't dig like, I dig like force users and lightsabers and laser guns that kill just by the laser bolt blast getting anywhere near the bad guy and all of that. I love reading those stories, but I don't want to write those stories because like I can't put my heart and soul into something like that because essentially it's stupid.
Well, lasers as a battlefield weapon for infantry is just stupid because it's incredibly high thermal signature. It's like shining a spotlight on yourself.
Yeah, you might as well just, hey, I'm here. You know?
Yeah,
The-
energy-based weapons at the grunt level, there's going to have to be some kind of wild leap in technology that like we can't even imagine, if you're going to pay any sort of attention to thermodynamics and basic physics. It ain't in the cards for guys
Why
who
would we pay, why would we pay attention to those things?
yeah, exactly.
That's
But even today, the IR lasers for aiming have started to become much less prevalent, just because night vision's become much more prevalent. So just like tracers, they work both ways.
That's right.
Yeah, I was just recently having this discussion, at the sniper schoolhouse, about getting back to no active emission mission profile training. Domestically, IR and thermal technology is just ubiquitous. I mean, it's in the hand of the good guy and the bad guy, everywhere. And even, 10, 12 years ago, domestically, where we still had the ability to use, IR aiming lasers and floods and things like that, now it's like you'll absolutely get compromised, moving to the target site because of the proliferation. Everybody's got a damn, Google Nest Cam that can see IR. It's just the way it is. So it's the same thing in the future to just imagine that we're going to have some pervasive technology that lets us see everything, do everything, illuminate everything, but it's not going to have any kind of a signature to give us away. It just doesn't make any sense.
I mean, we already see that some now. The complaint is there's so many satellites out that if you follow the James Webb Telescope stuff, they're complaining that now it's affecting their ability to look outwards because the way the satellites are blocking views. So I mean, we're already seeing that now. Imagine in the future.
In high Earth orbit.
It might have been before the James Webb Telescope. I just remember there was an article that I was reading that said one of the complaints was how the ubiquitous nature of modern satellites, once they started doing the cube satellites that were smaller, were interfering with the ability of astronomers to collect data.
Yeah, it's from Earth-based telescopes, so I wouldn't think James Webb Telescope would get any interference from those because they're all lower.
It's been a week or so since I read that article, so I've slept since then.
Yeah, out of spite, I aim all my lasers, wherever I can put a telescope on my night sky app. I aim all of my green and red lasers at it.
It's you. It's you.
If not for Starlink, I would not be talking to you right now.
So, that's fair. So do you think, Nick, that it's different when you display that information? Because you write military stuff too, but you do it in the venue of comics, which is more image-based. Do you think portraying that looks differently when it's drawn as opposed to described with words?
Oh, well, yeah, because I'm dealing with a visual medium. I don't leave too much to the imagination, except for when I'm writing, military science fiction. No, the sex scenes are pretty hardcore. Make a Marine blush. But this time I did it with people, not farm animals. So
there's a first time for everything.
It was a relief. Yeah. Anybody walking in and they're like, "Oh my god!"
Yeah.
Well, we put it on a Navy ship. I think that's a topic for next week.
Yeah.
But so you just leave less.
Super scared.
Dealing with the visual medium, I have to make it as realistic as possible. So I can't have, if a guy's rushing in and clearing a room, and he's got an M4, he's not going to chicken wing when he's coming in. He's going to have his shoulders tucked in tight. He's going to have proper form. So I got to draw that. And it's a lot of photo reference. I could draw it off memory, but sometimes it just doesn't look right because now I got to play with camera angles. So it's dynamic if I have the camera, set on the floor looking up while these, operators are coming in and doing the Lord's work. And, we're instead of describing it via word, I got to draw that. So sometimes I have to take a lot of reference photos. I got If anybody got into my phone and looked at my pictures, they'd be like, what the hell is this guy doing?
You know, Nick, it wasn't that long ago that the military taught the chicken wing.
I remembered because I'm a old spicy grunt. I came in '96. I know you guys are gonna be like, "Oh, he was just a baby." I know Doc is, but yeah, they used to teach the chicken wing, and they used to teach
in the side profile.
In the side profile, oh, there's all kinds of dumb shit, you know.
I mean, at the time, it wasn't dumb; it made sense. But technology changes, and you have to adapt with it. So that's a good segue.
Chicken wing has anything to do with technology.
Wars are good for a couple of things. One of them is creating new tactics, and and rewriting doctrine and how you're supposed to do things and how you're supposed to operate. So,
so when you guys write your combat scenes to make it realistic, do you start with the technology and adjust your characters the doctrine they use, or do you start with the doctrine as you know it and adjust the technology accordingly?
The former. I think about how you would use the technology and what kind of training and doctrine would rise up around it. Because you're not going to do anything resembling modern infantry fighting if you've got 9 foot tall, 2,000 pound battle suits. I mean, you ain't going to be you ain't going to be getting in cover with these things. You're going to be counting on mobility and armor because there ain't no cover for something that big.
And I'd be also throwing a lot of CAS at them and some indirect fire. Pepper the battlefield before I go in. I'm just mopping up.
Well, the other side has a say in that too.
Yeah,
yeah, and
that's the
thing. We've seen that you can't necessarily win a war just with CAS either.
No, you
can't.
Can't.
That's one thing that I can make a point of actually in those books is them talking about their close air support and how seldom they can actually count on it because the other side puts up their anti-air and they wind up finishing up their dogfights for air superiority about the time that the infantry has gotten to the objective. So
yeah.
There's like a couple of instances where they're like, oh my God, we actually have close air support this time.
Well, close air support also is affected by the politics of the day. So, for instance, if you were in Iraq in the early war, after that reporter charged an army, checkpoint and got lit up, suddenly everyone's afraid to pull the trigger lest they end up on the news. So I remember there were times we called air support and they sat over us for a little bit, did nothing, and then flew away and said, we can't get positive identification. And that was a direct result of the politics. So I imagine you push that forward, human nature being what it is, assuming we're talking humans, you're going to see some of that too, in which case you're still going to end up with the grunts at the short end of the stick.
Or assuming you're fighting humans, depending on the book.
Yeah. I mean, the only good bug is a dead bug. I get it, but
again, that depends on the government that is giving the orders, and you may have bug huggers in that government too.
Bug huggers, yeah.
Bug huggers, yeah, because there's always a couple.
It's like nut huggers.
No. There goes our family friendly rating between Nick and Rick.
Oh, I think we already lost family friendly rating because of Nick.
Yeah. But I said shit. Come on, they do that on network TV now.
So Doc,
I haven't even dropped an F-bomb yet.
Your specialty as a snake eater was being creative and thinking outside of the box tactically. So do you think that helps you when it comes to designing future conflicts?
I try and follow the it's funny that we started out talking about Starship Troopers because I think that for myself, RAH pretty much chiseled in granite the template for about every military science fiction story that anybody has tried to tell ever since. And part of his success was, like with most of his writing, is that the human element was timeless. Whether he was writing about if he had been writing about the Battle of Hastings up to Fallujah 1, the human element is what dominated in everything that he wrote. So I know that all you guys do the same thing. I read your stuff and it's and I sense the same thing going on, that the technology is the enabler of the mission set, but the human element and the and the nature of armed conflict is fairly immutable, and being able to tell stories, and sometimes the technology lets us extend capabilities, or it lets smaller numbers of fighters achieve greater effects as a result of technology, but the basic principles are exactly the same. And I think when it gets into writing realistic science fiction, it's the novel that I download, or when I used to buy paperbacks, the stuff I'd never finish is the stuff that violated that very basic tenet. Where yeah, maybe the guy was a good writer in some other genres, but when they jumped on the military science fiction bandwagon and started to write things, it's like they just didn't have the experience, and they didn't bother to do the research, and what they tried to visualize just wasn't working out to the consumer who knows better. So maybe I dare say I bet most of you guys probably track with that the same way I do.
Yeah. For me, it's always when everything is just too clean, and I don't care if it's a spaceship, which, like I said, we're chatting about soon for space combat. I mean, or dirt side. It's dirty, it's messy, it smells, bodily fluids happen. Like when you see everything so, I don't know, antiseptic, it's almost like, I mean, these people clearly never left their bubble, or they would know that too, I think. And then it makes you start looking at everything else. Now, Peter, I know your experience as a recon was a little different than what I did in the Army and what the others did. So do you think that changes how you look at things? Because my understanding of recon is a lot of sneaking and peeking, and maybe not so much the other stuff. I could be wrong.
We did a lot of that, but particularly in about 2005, battalion recon as well as force got the direct action mission too. So we did our fair bit of raids, and the fact of the matter was, in Iraq, a lot of the commanders you were attached to didn't really know what to do with recon. So we did a lot of basic grunt stuff too.
Okay.
And that's how we tended to get in fights. So
that was the thing. That was like one of the focuses of Generation Kill, was how they really didn't know what to do with the recon. They just put them in
contact.
Yeah.
So what you were saying is you were the most overqualified basic bitch grunts on the battlefield.
Yep, pretty much, for a good deal of it. My first month in country, we were holding battle space.
Welcome to the club, Pete. We meet on Thursdays.
Yeah.
So do you think when you write that you factor in more of the technology or more of the environment to make it realistic?
I generally start with the environment, and I sort of start with the environment and the tactics, and then if the technology that it gets introduced forces an adjustment in those tactics, then I go with that. And not everybody on the battlefield is necessarily going to be prepared for that adjustment that has to happen either. That's how people lose. We're seeing this in Ukraine right now with the ubiquitous use of drones, to the point where there's almost no way on the front lines to stay unobserved unless you're underground. And nobody was prepared for this. There's no doctrine, there's no SOP, so they're kind of making it up as they go along.
Well, the Russians have a doctrine for it. It's called "Our troops are expendable."
Oh yeah.
And we hope to put
that's been Russian doctrine from time immemorial.
And they hope to put more warm bodies out there than the Ukrainians have drones.
Yeah.
So the drones have been a thing since the initial invasion of Donbass. Was it 2014-ish? Drones were used to take down a Russian fighter. It got in the engine and it took it down. And drones have only gotten cheaper and easier to acquire. So I imagine that's going to play a factor. I read an article recently that the Marines were actually talking about adding to the Marine Rifle Squad a drone operator. I don't know if that was just task and purpose or anything came of it, but
I thought they already had drone operators.
The Army does.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's what
I doubt the Marine Corps does on a squad level yet, but the anti-armor switchblade is something like a third or less the cost of a javelin with about the same capability. So there's some indicators that there's going to be a lot more switchblades fielded than regular shoulder fired missiles.
There's also an article that I think JR put up just today about the Army has a microwave weapon that can take out, mass waves of drones. And I think that's going to be a thing that's going to be like an arms race between drones and anti-drone weapons. And honestly, this is not like a realistic prediction of future combat, but more something that I enjoy reading, that I don't want to see a drone battlefield. So I make sure that when my stories are set, that the pendulum is swung the other way, so that ECM makes drone combat impossible, because I don't want to write about it, and I don't want to read about it either.
And that's something I've been seeing a lot of. The drones have irrevocably changed everything, but the countermeasures haven't caught up yet, because there's always a countermeasure to everything. And that was one of the things that we bitched about constantly in Iraq, as we kept turtling and adding more and more armor. In the race between armor and firepower is going to win.
So that's one of the things that people there used to be the popular show If Pirates Met Knights, that kind of thing, that was on the History Channel back when they pretended history was something they talked about instead of just aliens and truck drivers. And one of the things they would do is they try to analyze the various weapons, and inevitably what you realize is that technology is a yin and a yang. So you make a weapon, I make a defensive counter, and it goes back and forth. So that's one of the things you always have to factor in when you're talking technology. If side A develops widget, whatever, like someone on the other side's working on a way to counter that.
Yep.
And when they don't factor that in, and the other team has the super weapon and nobody else can defeat it forever, I always get suspicious.
Because that means whoever's writing it hasn't studied the history enough to understand how these things work.
Yeah, I mean,
it's like the other thing, like Doc was saying, war is a human endeavor. You're never going to just see drones against drones, because then you may as well sit down and play chess to solve your differences. No, that's not how war works.
And and as a writing tool, as a for characters who are savvy and who are aware that their technology has limitations, letting the characters in the scenario, enter, battle space where what they thought was an advantage is no longer an advantage, is a wonderful thing, to put your characters through, and is very entertaining to write, and especially to read, giving somebody those challenges, which are, like I say, whatever way you imagine it based on the technologies that you're bringing to bear against the opponents in the story. That's a wonderful exercise to put yourself through, that it always lends something interesting to a story. And for the very reason that it's, like I say, it's realistic. Those are the things that we deal with constantly. That's why we have the schoolhouses and the think tanks and that we do, the brain trusts who are trying to, anticipate the challenges of what the next war is going to be. So it's all very.
Yeah, that's one of the things Nick and I were talking about in previous post shows where we just shoot the breeze and have a few beverages of adult varieties, was how often people forget that, the bad guys or the good guys, whoever, they show up with the perfect equipment for the perfect scenario where they're going. And I can't think how often, soldiers go into the field with winter gear when it's summer and vice versa. I mean, whole battle strategies were the Battle of the Bulge. They didn't have the right equipment, and look how that affected history of the world. I mean, I did my desert training at Fort Dix, New Jersey in the winter, wearing summer weight gear, rolling around in the snow. I mean, crap happens. And that's more common than not. And so whenever everything is too perfect,
great New Jersey desert.
Yeah.
I mean, we got lucky. We were right next to an Air Force base, so if you could crawl under the wire, you could get to the DFAC over on the Air Force side and eat good chow. The trick was getting back on the other side because they were patrolling for you. They didn't like the soldiers on their grass.
They're like, hey, who's this guy? Bada bing, bada boom.
But the good news is you could get seconds because running from the MPs got you that extra exercise, so it balanced.
Oh, yeah, MPs don't run. They got squad cars.
No, they don't. So do you guys factor in things like how the weather might affect equipment, or do you stick with the buttoned-up battle suit that neutralizes all those concerns?
Air Force, it would be SPs, I think, anyway.
SPs, yeah.
SF,
security forces.
Is it SF now? Okay, sorry. You said, what was it? You're asking about the weather, JR?
So when you guys write your combat, do you stick them in suits that negate all the weather, or do you like to go more like colonial marine equipment, for instance? We go back to that because it's so basic, where, you know, all the stuff that matters to humans on Earth matters to these people regardless of situation.
Almost all my troops wear sealed suits. I mean, they're not all powered, but they're sealed against, you know, poisonous gas, different atmospheres, you know. So none of them actually. There's kind of an insulation against extreme cold, heat. Well, the heat is worse than the cold because there's not a lot you can do for air conditioning, and you know, rain, stuff like that. It doesn't really get to them except for visibility wise.
Damn.
Okay.
But even
about
if you're, I'd say even if you're sealed up in armor, it's still going to cause you problems.
That is true.
I mean, if you go extreme cold, go ahead, Doc.
Oh no, I was saying one of the Galaxy's Edge books that I wrote for the guys was specifically, you know, they had a book. No, I'm fading because it's getting late at night. I get up at like 4 a.m, so it's like you guys do this stuff at like 9 Eastern. It's like, Daddy's sleepy. I'm usually in bed by now.
Yeah, I got to put bourbon in my coffee to do these things.
One of the popular Galaxy's Edge books was all about, you know, in their universe, the Battle of Sidon. And I wrote a later book that was from the special operations perspective about the battle for the planet of Sidon, which is a jungle planet. So even though exactly like Rick does, that my guys are in, you know, sealed armor that gives them all sorts of capabilities, but, you know, from myself, from years spent in the jungle, you know, there are some things that not even, you know, armor with any amount of augmentation will save you from. And the jungle is one of those environments, you know, where every step you sink, where, you know, you're carrying a 100-pound ruck, and, you know, every step up a slope is 2 or 3 steps sliding backwards, you know, where the rains come, you know, at all sorts of unpredictable hours and wipe out your visibility. And it's like I say, you know, those very real environments, you know, the kind of technologies that make our characters, you know, pretty much invulnerable in almost any environment. The jungle is the great equalizer for that. So yeah, JR, I wrote one book where the weather and the environment played a very, very decisive factor in the story and how the characters coped with things.
Okay. What about you, Nick, with your comics? Because, you know, you writing in a different medium than us.
Yeah. Weather always plays a factor. Even in my the military sci-fi story that I wrote, weather was definitely a factor in that one. And it didn't help that the troops that I was writing about sent to that planet were like, it took them like over, you know, and they had no intelligence on the enemy's capabilities, strengths, anything like that. They had to develop that once they got on ground. So, and it was a moist planet. So there was a lot of fog, a lot of rainfall, a lot of stuff that affected their equipment. Planet. It was moist. You know?
Okay.
So there's things like that. But even in the
like
comic
you need
books,
a shower, the way you say that.
You know, but like I like putting weather in there. I like giving them disadvantages, you know, because they're fully prepared. They got the best equipment, and if anyone who's ever done any time in the military knows, military grade doesn't mean what you think it means. So, like Phantom Hawk, he was raiding old military installations and stuff like that to get his equipment. So it was like battered, beat up. Some of it was on fire at one point, and he uses his knowledge to try and put the shit back together.
It's funny now when you're in the military, everybody in the infantry wants to buy the high tech, high dollar stuff from inside, and then people and civilians like hunters and stuff, they're all buying like military boots and gear and stuff. You got to laugh at them.
Yeah.
So we knew you only had a little bit of time because you've got deadlines and stuff, Peter. Peter, I know you got to bounce in just a second. So two things. One, the good stuff that you think you like when you see combat in science fiction, the bad, and then how people can find you before you bounce.
Okay. The good. Combat's friggin' exhausting. And it hurts, even if you're not getting shot. You just... A combat environment is just going from one set of pain to another. So if somebody actually gets that across, then they're doing a decent job. The bad, usually I find the bad is when it's like people in this profession don't do that, don't act that way. They don't talk that way. They don't act that way. Or just tactical stupidity because the plot has to happen. If you've got some kind of highly trained, high-speed, low-drag operator, and he does something rookie stupid without an excuse of being fallen down tired, just because you need things to go wrong, you probably need to step back and do things. As for where to find me, AmericanPraetorians.com. All my stuff is on Amazon. And I'm on Facebook too, and Twitter occasionally.
Hey,
okay.
we're going to
get all those
be
links
at Whidbey Island together this summer, aren't we?
That's right. Yes, the Galaxy Edge Fan Expo.
Okay.
Where?
Yeah.
And when is that?
That is July 20th through 23rd, I think.
Which means when this episode airs, after you celebrate freedom, and you celebrate it by buying all of their books because they're all war heroes, you should check it out. There's still probably tickets available, and we'll link to that as well. So we appreciate your time, as short though it may be, and now you can go please your taskmasters. I mean publishers. So Rick, you were weighing in on the way the scenario, like the mission would affect, or I think that's where you were going, about how sometimes the mission affects the tactics and vice versa. If I'm understanding what you were starting to say.
The technology. Are you talking about the technology affecting the tactics? I don't remember.
Well, we're going to pretend that's something smart you were saying, and we're just going to go from there.
Okay. All right. Well, we have to pretend. No, I feel like that's one thing we were talking about. What separates good military science fiction from bad, and I think one thing that's an easy button for a lot of writers is to take battles that have already happened and write them in a future military science fiction scenario. But the thing is, I don't think that's a good idea, because those battles in general happen because of the way they did, because of the technology available, because of the tactics that technology forced you into. If you have battle suits that can fly and satellites and orbital support, you're not going to get into a battle of the bulge situation. You're not going to be fighting in the Alamo. It's going to be different. Mobility is going to be key. You're going to need communication and what's the word I'm looking, observation that can bring in fire. It's not going to be Vietnam. It's not going to be World War II. It's not going to, and even though I don't see this as much, except recently, like in Galaxy's Edge, it's not going to be the Middle East. It's not going to be Iraq or Afghanistan. It's going to be something totally different. And I know that a lot of people who read military science fiction kind of want, Iraq, Afghanistan, or Vietnam or World War II with laser guns, but I feel like I want to write something where the battle plays out a different way because it has to. That's just my take on things.
Yeah, and if you can't be excited about writing it, why write it? I'm with you. It's like, why do I want to do a rehash of like Gettysburg, but with laser guns? I
So-
get excited about that.
So some of those tropes happen because things like sometimes battles get stumbled into before units are ready. That's what Gettysburg made it iconic. So you can take some of the underlying themes or the underlying issues
sure.
and make that work. Like what made Thermopylae famous wasn't so much the 300 because there were more than just the Spartans there, but it was the idea of using terrain superiority to win the day. And then it shows you what happens when you have a traitor in your midst because suddenly they flank you, right? Like you could use those ideas and still apply it. But if you write word for word, I agree, it'd get boring. I mean, they already have those in the history books, right? You don't need to redo it.
Now, I personally, I do find that, not so much the specifics of the battle engagements, but the specific settings of the political climate that led to there being some kind of conflict. I get a lot of inspiration historically from the politics that led to
Definitely,
the English Civil War, or whatever, T.E. Lawrence, in the Arabian Peninsula, or whatever, the Silu Scouts in Rhodesia, the political climate and what led to there being a conflict, I think is one of those perpetual human eternals that I think is excellent for research and inspiration.
Well, that's a big thing, John, that most writers in military science fiction don't spend enough time on, in my opinion, is the causes of the war, why people are fighting the war. Because there's not a lot of rational reasons to fight an interstellar war. If you're writing military science fiction in the future, rationally, resources is not a reason. In general, unless there's some hand-wavium, unobtainium thing like an avatar, you can get all the resources you need from places that nobody's going to fight you for them. The only resources you can't get from there, maybe something biological, and even then, it might be easier to grow it in a lab in an orbit than to fight somebody for it. So, coming up with a logical reason for there to be a space war is a difficult one.
So speaking of resources, one of the things people never factor in is the role the resources would take. So depending on when you are in the conflict, unless you've got like replicator technology a la Stargate, like at a certain point in time, you get a war going on long enough, you're going to be running out of bodies and you're going to be running out of equipment because running a war machine takes a lot. And at a certain point in time, that's going to be like, it takes how long for a human to be, born, raised. Like you start factoring all that in and you add a war that's been going on. At a certain point in time, recruiting, you're not going to get the best of the best because you just can get whatever you can.
Well, I think one of the things that we don't take enough into account is how few ships there actually may be. If you're doing anything that's like away from the Earth, people tend to have these huge fleets where everything blows up and there's still ships coming. But starships would be freaking expensive to build. And if you run a huge warship, that's going to take a significant portion of the gross solar product. I don't know, the whole solar system. And you're not going to be able to have like 100 of those things blown up and just keep coming back. After like 8 or 9 or 10, you may be at a point where you have no choice but to try to make peace because you ain't got no more ships.
And if you look at how many bodies it takes to crew those large ships, I
I
mean,
don't think
unless you're
bodies would be
using
a problem. I mean, there's already 8 billion people on Earth, and if you can build
Yeah, but
starships, you probably have like 100 billion people in a system or something like that.
a war goes on long enough with enough casualties, you're going to start having trouble getting people that meet the requirements. And depending on what your technology is, maybe not everyone can pass the test for. I mean, I'll give you a perfect example: the movie Halo, about the assault on Reach, where they had an issue where the main character, who is the becomes the captain later of a significant ship, he had an allergy to the medicine they use for cryofreeze to do the interstellar transport. That stuff is going to happen. And so you've got to factor that in too. And so once you start weighing that kind of stuff in, you're going to find not everybody's qualified to serve.
Well,
Like they
in
just
in
physically
the
can't.
Drop Trooper series, the problem isn't not everybody's qualified, but they don't have a draft for the most part. So getting people, it's kind of a very war on terror type of setting because most of the people on Earth are only half aware there's a war going on, and they're all everybody can be on the dole with free food and a free place to live, and getting anybody to actually fight a war is really difficult. So
There was that expression in the porta potties in Iraq where if you want to know what a soldier thinks, find out where they take a shit and read what they write on the walls. It's eternal. From the Romans at Hadrian's Wall to now. And it was, America's not at war. America's at the mall. The U.S. Army is at war. And that's pretty timeless sentiment.
I thought the Romans were mostly drawing dick pics.
Well, they were, but I gotta appreciate the
Infantry have been
dedication.
drawing dick pics for the longest time. I was over at there's a castle over there in St. Augustine, Florida. And
Oh yeah, the Castillo de San Marcos.
Yeah, you go in there and you look where the barracks is. Even though it's kind of like faded out, there's chingos of dick pics or dick drawings on the wall. So I'm like, oh man, infantry's infantry, no matter what time they're from.
So add that to your books. More dick pics, apparently.
Yeah, more dick drawings.
I love the Castillo de San Marcos. It's a beautiful place.
Yeah. Every time I'm there, I go and check it out, even though it don't change. I like walking around there.
So John, when you were writing your special operator in the Galaxy's Edge universe, did you address the things like the politics and the recruiting issues and all of that? Because you're writing about elite forces and not everybody can make the cut. I mean, you see that at SF selection.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Writing in, the Legionnaire universe, and writing in somebody else's universe is always, you got to play by their rules or you can't play, So one of like Jason Onspa's things is that the Legion's covert action force is called Dark Ops, and the Legion is such a elite organization that any Legionnaire could be selected for Dark Ops. And I took that as, okay, that's the setting of what you've created, but there still has to be, there's still proclivities and preferences and suitability and things like that. And that's how I kind of work that into the stories to describe who really was like in Dark Ops versus who wasn't. What was the question? Oh,
no, you answered it.
And I think you answered the future questions we're about to have.
So the last question would be, since Nick and Doc, you guys played with the special squirrels, how do you factor in the need? Because special operators are called that for a reason. Like, generally speaking, they're well-oiled machines, but that can be boring to read. So how do you balance I'm a well-oiled machine with giving personality to characters that are minor, might not be hidden behind lots of armor, you might not see their faces, and like I said, you want to give them personality, but how do you balance that?
For me, writing in, like I say, in somebody else's universe, it made me extremely unpopular with a great number of the fans because the conflicts that I set up with people were very much the kind of conflicts of, dudes who I was on teams with, is like you have that pull to, be the tip of the spear, but at the same time, you have that same competing pull about the life that you might be missing that could be if you weren't behind the gun, and I mean, everybody, in the military basically wages that kind of battle. I mean, everybody in our modern era are volunteers into the military, but everybody who I ever served with, basically, even if you're committed to being a careerist and doing 20 years, there's still some part of you that says, what would my life be like if I wasn't doing this? And every periodically looking at, yeah, I know I've got 12 years in, but I'm still young enough to do something else. Am I making a mistake by driving on? I see who I'm going to be in, at 20 years, I'm going to be that guy there. Do I want to be that guy, or do I want to take a different path? So, I introduced that as, a conflict, a very realistic conflict that most of us dealt with ourselves in our service, and certainly the other people around us dealt with. And I caught a lot of flack and a lot of just general hate, for guys who primarily want to read, like, lightsaber triple backflips, one guy kills 20 bad guys kind of scenarios. I mean, I found my audience, or my audience found me, and won them over, and my series became pretty popular within GE, but it was completely unlike all of the other books within canon.
You are one of the few in military science fiction who takes into account, like, when a body is that you don't just leave the guy and all of his equipment. You police that shit up. And so often it's just like when I see it on the TV or you read about it, and I'm like, no, you grab his rifle. You don't leave that for the bad guys. Nope. And so that's one of the things you see that I think you did a pretty good job. My favorite, though, was because we talked about this when we interviewed you when the first Dark Operator came out, was the people that were like, do you even operate, bro? Like, they were questioning your pedigree, and I just had to laugh because it always amuses me. So,
well, part of that I get into, which is, I just finished another Dark Operator, and to spoil it, it's the last main series, last main book in the Dark Operator series. And, I talk about those things. It's like, when it gets to like writing special operations, the problem with the average guy writing about some kind of, super secret tier 1 special operations group is they don't have a fucking idea what special operations is. It's not, guys who are bigger and stronger or better. Look, I mean, it's like guys, you served with in 25th, you served with in the 101, stuff like that. There were guys on average fire team who were as studly a bunch of dudes as there is anywhere in any tier 1 selected unit, right? There's dudes who are just super studs. That's all there is to it, right?
Most of them were skinny little bastards.
Yes.
Yeah. Very non-assuming.
Exactly. Right, exactly. And that's the whole another huge point about it too, is it's ostensibly some of those guys, there's nothing about them until you see them perform.
Well, except for Navy SEALs, because apparently they have forever to pump iron.
Who is capable of that sort of like superhuman performance,
Except for Navy SEALs, Doc, because apparently they have a lot of time to pump iron. They're the ones I've seen mostly that are jacked.
Yeah. Or they look like ostriches.
But the point being that also, special operation, most people, that they have no idea what constitutes a special operation, of which there's a huge spectrum of those missions and the skills that it takes to pull those missions off correctly. And most of them, are done with support by non-special operations units, and a handful of them are done with no support and are done, as lone operator, as individual missions and things like that. So there's a really big, wide spectrum. So, it's like I say, for my small bailiwick of expertise, small unit tactics and special operations are things that I know very well. But, my point about that is like, I'm the same thing. When I have to write about large unit engagements, that involve, indirect fire, air support and things like that. You know what? I have to research. I have to pick up the phone and call, somebody in the artillery branch. I got to pick up the phone and call a buddy who is a FAC. I got to pick up the phone. I have to do my research from the subject matter experts to make sure that I'm not committing huge gross errors, even though like I'm supposedly like an expert in military operations. Yeah, and small unit tactics and special operations, I can hold my own. On other things, I still have to do my research. I still have to ask those who know, just because if for nothing else, I don't want to alienate the guy who knows better, who's reading the product. He's invested in my product. I'm a big tent guy. I want to entertain everybody, but it's like, I especially do not want to alienate the guy who knows better, because I don't want him to be in the same situation like I've found myself in as the reader for most of my life, saying, yep, that was a pretty good book. It's just a damn shame that guy didn't ask somebody who knows, because with a little tweaking, with just that much effort and a little tweaking, he could have turned that story into something that didn't make me and all my buddies slap our foreheads with how freaking stupid he was. But he didn't give the effort.
Where I've read more of that, even in military science fiction or military like thrillers. It's funny, but right after the War on Terror started, from the so-called nonfiction books that a lot of people were churning out about the war, you could tell just by reading someone, this guy was never over there, never talked to anybody who was over there, doesn't know what the hell he's talking about.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like crime books and detective books and all those kind of other genres where it's like, wow, they may be really popular, but it's like the author did not talk to anybody who actually did that job or knew anything. They wrote a very entertaining story, but it's like, to the dudes who know better, they alienated them because everything about it is unrealistic. So I don't want to make anything so pedantic and realistic that it's a slog to get through, but at the same, by the same token, it's like I say, for the guy who knows better, I want him to be entertained as much as anybody.
Okay. So I know Rick and I tend to write the everyman, but when it comes to writing the special tier 1 operator, Nick, do you have anything to add when you're writing with comics, or you think Doc pretty much summed it up for you as well?
Oh, I love having Doc on, because every thought I've ever had or question that you would ask me, Doc's answered it like 15 minutes ago. So it saves me a lot of talking. But yeah, he's right on mark. I stuff. I had the pleasure in my military career not only being a spicy grunt and serving the special operations community, but when I crossed over and got stupid and became an officer, I got all the way up to like battalion staff. So I got a lot of knowledge there of the battalion level and sometimes even brigade levels.
Battalion staff always seemed like one of the most hellish jobs that I never would have wanted.
Oh, it was so bad. I was brewing coffee, and instead of water, I put Red Bull in there. There's
a reason that podcast is called
sounds.
There's a reason that podcast is called The Angry Staff Officer, not the Content Staff Officer, the Angry Staff Officer. All right. Well, we could go on this.
Most bitter officers I ever ran into were majors and battalion staff.
Bitter, I believe it. But so we could go on this topic forever. And if you've got anything you want us to address, dear listener, dear viewer, put it in the comments and we can have these guests back. I do have their messenger handles, so I can get them again if we need to. With that being said, we didn't interrupt with a commercial because Peter's time was limited. So I'm going to list a book by each one of these authors as the sponsor, and you can check them out in the show notes. With that being said, Rick, can you tell listeners and viewers how they can find you on the wild, wild interwebs?
If you're on Facebook, I'm at facebook.com/Duty Honor Planet, which is the science fiction worlds of Rick Partlow. I also have a author blog, rickpartlow.com. But the best place to find my books is to just search for my name on Amazon. I'm basically the only one by that name. So.
Okay. And what about you, Doc? How can listeners and viewers find your books?
Likewise, the beautiful world we live in. You go on Amazon and type in Doc Spears, and you'll get about 9 or 10 titles up there. And on Audible, I would push people to read Warlord.
It's a good book.
Very kind. That series is continuing on, and there'll be a new Dark Operator 6. It's in the hands of the publishers right now, so Audible production being what it is and things, I'm sure by the end of summer or early fall that'll be out.
Okay. And Nick, you just added something special today, so can you tell us about your?
I did. I added Buy Me a Coffee.
So if you want to support, you can support him by the panel or the page for his comics to keep him churning them out quicker. Because I understand his colorist and all the subspecialties aren't free. They don't want to work for his smiles. I don't know what that's about.
Oh no, I drink a lot of coffee and I dip, so they don't want to see my smile. But I added commissions to my Buy Me a Coffee, so you can check that out too.
All right, outstanding. And you can find us, dear listener. I should have this up, but I was so distracted by that smile. All right, you can find us on Twitter at twitter.com. Not to get it weird or anything, twitter.com /SF_fantasy_show, Sierra Foxtrot _fantasy_show. You can email the show at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. We have a Facebook group where all the shenanigans happen at facebook.com/groups/Blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, /groups/Blasters and Blades Podcast. If you ever want to comment on the episodes, that's an easy place to go to do that. Or you can comment on our website at anchor.fm/blasters and tag blades. Again, anchor.fm/blasters-and-blades, where for as little as 99 cents a month, you could keep the show running. They're not free to produce, but so we appreciate every penny. The sleepiness of Doc is contagious because I've been getting up early lately too to fit in the exercising. But the goal is, though, by this time next year, so April 2024, it says I will hit my Army weight. I could fit my uniform again if I keep up on this trajectory. I don't know what I'd do with it. They don't, like, the Class A's are just not a thing anymore, but I could. So that's the goal.
I don't know what you guys are talking about being sleepy. It's still light outside here.
That's like so bizarre. It's like I was like actually like I got my like warm fuzzies on for bed, and I'm moving that way, and I go, oh no, I told JR that I would like join a podcast tonight. Oh, shit.
It's not
We're
even,
going to start doing some of these
here yet.
We're going to start doing some of these chats a little bit earlier now that Nick's on day schedule. But you can also support the show over at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put it in the show notes, in the notes that it's for the podcast. And I promise I will keep my co-hosts, Doc Cisca and Nick Garber, duly caffeinated, and Nick's jaws filled with all the dips. You should quit, though. That's bad for you. But we'll do the thing.
What do you want to live forever?
No, I mean, I made lots of stupid decisions because I said, what's the worst they could do? Bend my dog tags and send me to Iraq? But
it's like a buddy of mine said a long time. It's like, if I can't drink, have a smoke once in a while. It's like, life hasn't been that damn good.
I think you have good friends, Doc. All right. So thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For Nick Garber and Doc Cisca, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. I'm reading it like she was reading it because that's who it's written for. I'm J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. And I promise before the next one, Nick and I will caffeinate, so we will be like as energetic as ever. Red Bull in the coffee, people. We will make it happen. All right. Thank you for coming, Rick. Thank you for coming, Doc. We appreciate it. It's always a pleasure.
All on my end.